Hello, and welcome to my reading of Used to Be, my story in Across the Universe, Tales of Alternate Beatles. Note my incredibly sophisticated method of giving you the Scan Me barcode, because I have absolutely no video editing skills whatsoever. Sorry about that. I'll show that again at the end of the reading, in case you actually like the story and want to hear it. Little background, my notion for what to do for Across the Universe was to have the Fab Four be the members of a party in a Dungeons and Dragons style setting, with John as a bard, Paul as a wizard, George as a cleric, and Ringo as a barbarian. And conveniently, I already had such a setting that I had created. In the 2004 novel Dragon Precinct, I created the world of Flingaria, which is a very D&D style fantasy setting in which the main characters are detectives who solve crimes and stuff. They are part of the Cliff's End Castle Guard. This story doesn't use those characters, Danthras and Torin, the two main characters of Dragon Precinct and its various sequels that I have done over the years, but instead other members of the Castle Guard do show up, who have appeared in other books. You don't need to have read any of my other fiction to follow this at all. Having said that, if you do read Dragon Precinct and its sequels, Unicorn Precinct, Goblin Precinct, Griffin Precinct, and Mermaid Precinct, as well as the short stories in Tales from Dragon Precinct, you will be rewarded with little Easter eggs from throughout. Having said that, you don't need to have read them. This story, I think, stands on its own fairly well. So, without further ado, Used to Be, my contribution to Across the Universe, edited by Randy Dawn and Michael Ventrella, currently available from the fine folks at Fantastic Books. Written by me, Keith R. A. DeCandido, and read by me also. Here we go. So who is that? Sergeant Manet asked Gonzal and Jason, the two guards who had brought in the prisoner. Jason stared at the sergeant. Don't you recognize him? Gonzal rolled his eyes. Don't let him give you that shit, Sarge. I didn't recognize him either. That's John, from the Fabulous Foursome. Manet blinked. You're kidding. He's still alive? Well, obviously, because we brought him in. Shaking his head, Manet said, All right, what's the charge? He was trying to board the Elnor without passage, Jason said. Captain Rigby insisted we arrest him. No, actually, Gonzal said. I insisted we arrest him, especially after he pulled a sword on Rigby. How the mighty have fallen. Manet walked over to the cell where they'd placed the prisoner. I remember back when that warlord, Polythin, was marching through the forest of Nimvale. Gonzal frowned. I thought that was Gan Brightblade that stopped them. Oh, bloody hell! Came a grumpy voice from the cell. It was the bard himself, John, who stood up and gripped the bars of the cell. Gan Brightblade was a poser, yeah? We were the ones who stopped Polythin and Huang and Jude the Cruel. And it wasn't them that stopped Mitos the Mighty. I don't care what those other bards say. We were bigger than Brightblade. And now he's gone on to the great beyond. Maybe we can finally get our due, okay? Gonzal looked up at the ceiling. There he goes again. What do you mean? Manet asked. The whole time we were dragging his ass over here from the docks, he was going on about Brightblade. Manet sighed. Gan Brightblade and his friends were among the greatest heroes in the land, having defeated Chalmrake the Foul, Mitos the Mighty. John's claim was the first Manet had heard that anyone else had defeated him, and many other wizards and warlords and others who had threatened the lives of the people of Flingaria, as had, of course, John and his three cohorts. Anyhow, Manet said aloud, I was there when Polythin came through the forest with his forces. This was right around when Lord Albin was starting to turn the Castle Guard into a law enforcement agency, and a bunch of us were sent to the forest to try to stop them. Manet stood with several guards, swords out, forming a phalanx. This is crazy, he said to Linder, another young man who had signed up for the Castle Guard, expecting to spend most of the time watching over rich idiots, not actually engaging in combat. After all, The Elven wars were far away to the west. Staying in Cliff's End should have been safe. Yet here they were, facing off against a crazed warlord who was taking advantage of the fight against the Elf Queen to try to make a claim on the human lands. "Here they come!" Sergeant Repep cried. "Get ready!" Manet watched as the warlord and his forces came into view, charging toward their line. There seemed to be a good deal more of them than there were of his fellow guards. "I really don't want to die," Manet muttered. "Well, these guys have plate armor and bigger swords and actual shields," Linder said. "We've got leather armor, swords, no shields. I'd say we're pretty much doomed." And then, suddenly, a lightning bolt struck the charging soldiers. "Hold the line!" Repep screamed. Some of Manet's fellow guards looked as if they were about to run, but Manet and Linder, at least, stood their ground. Then they saw the source of the lightning. A man was floating over the trees, hands raised. One hand clutched some roots, the other a stone. It had to be a wizard, though he didn't dress in the traditional wizard's robes or hat, his dark hair looking like he used a bowl to cut around and shape it. "Mitre be praised," Linder said. "It's Powell." Manet frowned. "Really? The wizard?" Linder was grinning now, and that means the others can't be far behind. Sure enough, a large man with a huge nose came barreling through the trees, taking out 4 of Polythin's soldiers with one punch. "There's Starkey! That barbarian always knows how to hit things hard." Manet was just worried that the presence of the fabulous foursome would piss off Polythin. Sure enough, the warlord himself, the only person who was on horseback, raised his axe and cried, "You will not deprive me of my conquest, fools!" "We'll see about that," Powell said, casting another lightning bolt. Then Manet heard hoofbeats. Someone else was on horseback. Astride Ono, his beautiful black horse, John the Bard came galloping onto the field of battle, the wind doing very little to disturb his hair, which seemed to be styled the same as the others. Instead of engaging Polythin's forces, Manet and the other guards found themselves spectators. Powell continued to rain lightning down upon the warlord's soldiers. Those who weren't struck down by the wizard's might were felled by Starkey's mighty blows. But while the mage and barbarian fought the troops, John went straight for the warlord himself. "You will not defeat me again, Bard," Polythin said. "Let's find out, shall we?" John said as he rode toward the warlord, his sword raised. A few of the soldiers got past the foursome, and Manet found himself forced to tear his eyes away from the battle to defend against 2 soldiers who were bearing down on him and Linder. Manet managed to run through his own attacker by striking at the neck, the one weak spot in the armor, but Linder didn't fare as well, as he was stabbed right in the chest, the sword going through his castle-issue leather armor as if it were parchment. Swinging his blood-soaked sword at Linder's attacker's neck, he took him down the same way, but the damage was done. "Linder!" Manet knelt down next to his comrade, who was now bleeding rather profusely. Out of nowhere, a man appeared with dark hair cut similarly to that of Powell, but he wore the white robes of a devotee of Rish, a minor god from the nomadic tribes to the north. "Don't worry," Acolyte Georg said in a soft voice. "Your friend will be healed." Georg lay his hands on Linder's chest, and moments later the bleeding stopped. While the damage to his armor remained, the damage to the person under it was healed as if he'd never been attacked. "You all right, Linder?" Manet asked. Linder blinked several times. "I think so. I'm not dead, right?" "Nope." "Good. I'd hate to think the afterlife looked like the forest of Nimvale." Manet chuckled, then looked up to see that the forest in question was now littered with Polythin's soldiers, none of whom were upright, many of whom were probably dead. John and the warlord clashed swords, but with the foot soldiers taken out, it wasn't long before Powell and Starkey joined that fray. The wizard and barbarian stood on either side of the bard's steed. "Surrendering might be your best career move, old son," John said. "Never!" Powell sighed. "Suit yourself. Starkey?" Grinning, the big barbarian wound up his massive fist and punched Polythin so hard he went flying off his horse. John grinned. "Now that's what you call a dismount." Sergeant Manet stared at John through the bars. His hair had gotten both longer and whiter in the intervening years. "Why were you trying to board the Elnor?" Manet asked. Gonzal muttered, "Here we go again." John started waving his arms. "Don't you understand? With Gan Brightblade and half his chums dead, we were all that's left to stop Chalmrake." Head in hands, Gonzal said, "Told you." "Chalmrake the Foul is dead," Manet said. "That's what he wants you to think." John was now up against the bar, screaming, "But he's not dead. He's never dead, yeah. Just coming back like a bleeding copper coin. But he's biding his time, right? First he killed Gan Brightblade and his pet wizard Otharloth Sirans. Then he killed Lord Alban, then the Pirate Queen. Not to mention that fire in Barlin." Manet sighed. The mighty really have fallen. He turned and walked away. "If I had a silver for every time I heard some shitbrain say that Chalmrake the Foul was alive, I could retire to my own island." Jason, though, wandered over to the cell. "Did you ever actually meet Brightblade?" "Oh, for Tamisa's sake," Gonzal said. "Will you leave him alone?" Ignoring his fellow guard, Jason asked again, "Did you? I mean, you and Four and Brightblade's crew were some of the greatest heroes in all of Flingaria." "Some?" John made a noise. "That gobshite was no hero. He was a glory hound, he was. Taking credit for Mitos. That wasn't even Mitos they fought. It was some poxy wizard having a go." Jason frowned. "I thought Mitos was a wizard." "Some other wizard." John glared at him. "Anyhow, I did meet Brightblade once. We were in Valessa meeting with the king and queen, and Brightblade was there." The Chamberlain had informed them that King Marcus was finishing a meeting with some nobles from Barlin, who were leaving on a caravan that evening, but then he and Queen Marta would see them. Starkey was eyeing a potted plant and saying, "I hope there's food at this meeting." "You just ate an hour ago," Powell said. "That was an hour ago." Starkey stared at the wizard. "I'm hungry again." John grinned. "He's a growing boy with an appetite." With a snort, Powell said, "If he grows any more, he won't fit in the door." A booming voice sounded from the corridor. "Can it be? Do mine eyes deceive me?" Turning, the quartet of adventurers turned to see the strapping figure of Gan Brightblade himself striding toward them. "Well, well, well, long live the king," John muttered. "Mr. Brightblade," Powell said a bit more politely, "what brings you to Valessa?" "I have business here and wish to pay my respects to Marcus and Marta." "Bloody hell," John muttered. Brightblade bristled. "Is something troubling you, Bard?" "It's nothing," Powell said quickly. "John does not always think before he speaks." Laughing, Brightblade said, "Just what one wishes in a person who performs for a living." Sparing the wizard a nasty glance, John reached for his sword hilt. "Performing is only a part of how I make my living, old son. I also use my sword." "Oi!" Georg stepped forward. "Enough of this. We're in the Palace of the Silver Thrones, not a bloody Dockland tavern. And we should all be friends here." John let go of his sword hilt. "I'm not the one who talks about visiting Marcus and Marta. It's their majesties King Marcus and Queen Marta to us proles, yeah?" Starkey brayed a laugh. "Since when do you care about respect to the king and queen? I remember you're the one who always said they were proper divvies." John shrugged. "Well, they are proper divvies, but I still respect the office, yeah?" "As do I," Brightblade said tightly. The Chamberlain then appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "The king and queen will see the fabulous foursome now." Doing a double take, the Chamberlain quickly added, "Mr. Brightblade! Goodness, I'd no idea you were here. You may, of course, join the foursome." John was about to object, but Georg spoke quickly. "We'd be honored for the great Gan Brightblade to join our audience with the Silver Thrones." John was pacing about the cell. Jason was captivated by his story. Gonzal had long since wandered off, and Sergeant Manet was on the other side of the room talking to a couple of other guards. "Georg was always making peacemaker like that," John said. "Brightblade had no business joining us, but he just barged on in, and Georg let him. And then he was all chummy with Marcus and Marta, as if he'd insist on calling them. I'm not even sure they liked him. They just liked the way he was all heroic. Of course, so were we, but we didn't soak up properly. Not that we needed to." Jason was about to say something when he was blinded by a flash of light. Instinctively, he reached for his sword hilt, but when the flash died down, he saw a face that was as familiar as the Bard's. More so, truly, since he'd been at Lord Albin's funeral last year. And there's Powell. Perfect ending to a perfect day. John threw up his hands. Unlike John, who had obviously aged considerably since Manet had seen him in the forest of Nimvale, Powell still looked like a young man, the benefit of being a magic user. He even had that silly haircut the sergeant had described. The wizard walked up to the cell. "What have you done this time, old friend?" John pointed an accusatory finger. "You don't get to call me that. Not anymore." "Come on, John. After all we've been through together." "After all we've been through together, you should have been on my side after Mitos." "I wasn't on anybody's side." Powell let out a long breath. "There was nothing else we could do." "Wait," Jason said. "I thought Gan Brightblade and his friends killed Mitos. In fact, I heard Medin the Bard tell that story last year." Powell winced and John punched the cell bars with his hands. "Medin's got no business calling himself a bard. Certainly not if he tells that pack of lies." John started pacing around the cell again. For several seconds, Powell just stared at his friend, and then turned to look at Jason with affection and compassion in his hazel eyes. Jason had only known a few wizards in his time. Buneen, the wizard assigned to the castle guard, plus a few others here and there. But Powell was the only one who had a compassionate expression. Jason had to admit to being surprised. "Why was he arrested?" the mage asked. Jason swallowed nervously. Well, he was trying to board a boat without passage in order to go after Chalmrike the Foul." Looking to the ceiling in supplication, Powell then turned to the cell. "I've told you, Chalmrike has not come back from the dead." "You expect me to believe you, do you?" John asked angrily. Powell walked right up to the bars and stared in at the Bard. "I've never lied to you, John. Not once. You lied about Mitos." "I didn't!" Snarling, John moved away from Powell and went to stand at the far corner of the cell, standing over the only other occupant. During the daytime, the cells in the precinct house tended to be empty. At night, it became filled with drunks and brawlers, but by sunup, they were all let go. In this case, the exception was a drunk who had yet to finish sleeping off his debauchery, so he continued to slumber on the cell's one cot. Jason noted that John started tapping the brick wall of the cell in time with the drunk's snoring. The guard then turned to the wizard. "Excuse me, but are you telling me that Gan Brightblade didn't kill Mitos the Mighty?" "Not entirely." John, Georg, and Starkey sat in the Goblin's Teeth in Treemark, at the table in the corner that the proprietors always gave to the fabulous foursome when they were in Treemark. "Shall we drink a toast?" Starkey asked, reaching for one of the 4 flagons of ale that sat in the center of the wooden table. John was about to say yes, but Georg held up a hand. "We should wait until Powell arrives." Starkey grumbled. "Bloody wizards, never on time for anything." As if on cue, Powell entered the tavern then, walking straight to the foursome's table. John grinned. "There you are, old son. Grab a drink so that we may toast the death of Mitos the Mighty. My only regret is that we weren't the ones who killed the blood." "I'm afraid not," Powell said gravely, the only one who didn't grab a flagon. He did, however, take a seat between John and Georg. "What do you mean?" Georg asked. "Brightblade and the others didn't kill Mitos. They faced another wizard named Virak, who disguised himself as Mitos and faked being killed so that everyone would think Mitos was dead. Mitos himself has been sent to the Panzeric dimension." "How could that happen?" Starkey asked. "It's unthinkable," Georg muttered. John, though, stared right at Powell. "The bloody Brotherhood, isn't it?" Powell nodded. Georg's eyes went wide. "Are you telling me that the Brotherhood of Wizards conspired to engineer this deception?" "So it would seem." "Seem?" John slammed his flagon on the table, his ale spilling on the wood. "You're not sure?" "It was decided in a colloquy. They tend not to include me in those, seeing as how I associate with you lot." "Well, I'm sorry the Brotherhood considers us undesirable," John said with a sneer. "They can take heart in knowing that the feeling's mutual." Powell let out a long breath. "In any case, There's little use in toasting the death of Mitos the Mighty when he's not dead. Starkey frowned. You said he was in some other dimension? Nodding, Powell said. The Panzeric. Well, you can get us there, right? John's face broke into a huge grin. Yes! We can stop him for good and show that bright blade how it's done. I don't, Powell started. Don't give me that Brotherhood guff, Paul. John pointed an angry finger at the mage. They pulled a fast one, and it's not right. When things aren't right, that's when we step in, yeah? John is correct, Georg said quietly. We must have justice for his victims. The Brotherhood's actions are not in keeping with the Bodhi of Rish. Very well, Powell said. Let us drink to our next adventure, then. They all raised their flagons. Jason stared at Powell as he just stopped telling the story. Finally, he prompted the wizard. Then what? Oh, go ahead, John said from the back of the cell. Tell him how you stabbed us in the back. I did no such thing, Powell said defensively. He turned back to Jason. We went to the Panzeric dimension, but when we arrived, we found that Mitos was not well. He'd gone balmy, so what? John was now back at the bars of the cell. Doesn't change what he did. Yes, but he was helpless. We fight the good fight to defend the people of Flingaria. Yeah, we did, John said angrily. And nobody needed defending more than Mitos' victims. He destroyed an entire city. He killed dozens. He needed to be killed while sitting drooling in a chair. That drew John up short. He was probably faking that, he said weakly. Jason was having trouble picturing it. Mitos the Mighty was drooling in a chair? A powerful wizard. Mitos had destroyed Shale's Haven, killing everyone who lived there. And that was just the last horrible thing he did before Brightblade stopped him. Or, apparently, didn't. Mitos had lost his mind, Powell said. He couldn't even raise his head to look at us. I went to the Panzeric dimension full of righteous indignation against the Brotherhood for letting such a horrible criminal avoid justice. But when I saw him just sitting there, helpless, I couldn't do anything. I could have done something if you didn't hold me back, John muttered. Georg agreed with me, Powell snapped, and he was the one who convinced me to take you all in the first place. Mitos didn't even know who he was anymore. So you think that was the right thing to do? John asked. Just let everyone think that Dunderhead and those other bleeding idiots killed Mitos when he's sitting all comfy in some other dimension? That's your idea of doing the right thing, yeah? It wasn't, no, Powell said quietly. But killing him in that state would have been just as wrong. The Brotherhood believes it was best if everyone in Flingaria thought he was killed in pitched combat with his greatest enemy. Which didn't bloody happen! John threw up his hands. It's all a lie! And you all wanted to perpetuate that lie! It was for the best. For who? The two old comrades just stared at each other for several seconds. Jason watched as Powell stared with his compassionate hazel eyes at the bard and his wild brown eyes. To Jason's surprise, the wizard looked away first. Magic users, in his experience, were usually made of stronger stuff. Powell asked the guard, how long will he have to remain imprisoned? Until it's time for him to see the magistrate. Probably tomorrow sometime. Nodding, Powell turned and left the precinct house. Jason turned to face the prisoner. You know, it's funny. There's lots of rumors about why you four stopped fighting together. Never put any stock in any of them myself. Especially that stupid one about how you had a big argument about your horse. Never imagined it was over that shit-brained wizard. Yeah, well, John said. If you have an issue with that, the shit-brained wizard just walked out. Talk to him. I meant Mitos, not Powell. Mitos wasn't the issue. It was that Powell gave in to those pillocks in the Brotherhood instead of doing what was right. Jason would have continued the conversation, but he was called away to a disturbance. Someone had tried to set one of the boats on fire or something, so he had to go help with crowd control. Sergeant Manet was about to go off shift when two familiar figures appeared in the doorway to the precinct house. Act like Georg, Manet said, as the older man in white robes came in, followed by a large barbarian. Neither one's hair was cut like a bowl any longer. It seemed Powell was the only one who maintained that style. Georg's was lengthy, down almost to his waist, and he now wore a full beard. Starkey, the barbarian, had cut his very short. Do we know each other, sir? You do look familiar. Manet assumed he was being polite. In the forest of Nimvale, I was assigned... Yes, I remember now. Georg snapped his fingers. When we fought Polovin, I healed one of your comrades. You knelt by his side while I ministered to him. His name was Linder, if I recall. For a moment, Manet's mouth just hung open. You remember? My devotion to Rish is such that I recall all whom he helps through me as his conduit. How fares Linder? He was promoted to lieutenant a few years after that, and then he was killed in the line of duty. No waste. Georg sighed. Starkey was picking at the dirt under his fingernails. Can we get on with this? I assume, Manet said, that you wish to see John. Georg nodded. If we may. Why was he arrested? He tried to board a boat without passage. Said he needed to track down Chalmrake the Foul. Not only thinks the crazy wizard's back from the dead, but that he killed Gan Brightblade, the Pirate Queen, Lord Alban, and probably my Aunt Martha as well. Georg did not laugh at Manet's joke about his aunt, who actually had died of natural causes. I see. Please take us to him. Nodding, Manet led them back to the cell. The drunk had woken up and been let out, and the idiot who'd started the fire earlier that day had been brought to the castle to rot in the hole there. So the bard was alone in the cell, lying on the cot that the drunk had been snoring on earlier. Without opening his eyes or getting up, John spoke as Manet led Georg and Starkey over. Should have known you two'd show up eventually. I didn't want to come, Starkey said. I said to let you rot, but Georg insisted. I couldn't let him try to wander around Cliff's End all alone. A lad like him could get hurt. Georg actually smiled at that. I can take care of myself, Starkey. So you say. You didn't see how those lads on the Riverwalk were looking at you. With a chuckle, Georg turned to face John, who still had not gotten up, though he had opened his eyes. I assume Powell has already been and gone? Yes, and he still thinks he did the right thing with Mitos. Because he did. Now John got up. Don't you start! His victims needed justice! Why do we even bother doing what we do if we can't get justice? You never did listen to me, did you? Georg shook his head. Rish urges us to fight for justice, but they also urge patience and vigilance and calm. Well, you've always had that one down, John muttered. There are only two sure things in life, John. We are born and we die. All we may do is try to make the parts in between as bearable as possible. Yes, we fight for justice, but we don't win every fight. Starkey snorted. That's certainly true. No matter how strong you are, there's always some bloke who's stronger. Georg gave Starkey an acknowledging nod and then said, Justice is an elusive prize, John. Trust isn't. John shook his head. I trusted Paul, and he betrayed what we stood for. We all did. Powell, me, Starkey. There was no justice in destroying someone who's helpless. Definitely, Starkey added. No sport in beating up a lad what's sitting in his chair drooling. John, Georg said quietly, you don't truly believe Chalmrake is back, do you? For several seconds, the bard just stared at the cleric. Then he chortled. Never could put one over on you, acolyte. Nah, I was just ranting about that so they'd arrest me. It's the only way to get talked to Powell. No other way to reach that wizard unless he thinks I'm in trouble. You are in trouble, I'm afraid, Manet said. Captain Rigby is insisting that you be imprisoned. He doesn't care if you're a famous hero. Let him do as he wishes. Georg spoke urgently. You mustn't give up hope. Why shouldn't I? You've already tried everything you can. All your precious Rish has done is put things off. Manet frowned. What are you two talking about? With a sigh, Georg said, John is dying of Kota's disease. Oh. Manet found he couldn't say much else. Kota's was a debilitating illness that usually claimed victims so quickly that it was rarely diagnosed until they were dead. Obviously, Georg had used his healing abilities to stave the disease off, but just as obviously, it was only a temporary measure. I'm sorry. Don't be, John said. I fought many battles, sung many songs. I was in Yaren last month, and someone was performing my version of our Battle of the Strawberry Field. It was completely different from the way I perform it, but it still worked. I've only got one regret. He punched the cell bars again. That damned wizard wouldn't give me the satisfaction of admitting he was wrong. Because I'm not. Manet looked around. The voice seemed to come from everywhere. Then a bright light, and Powell reappeared. Manet saw sadness in the wizard's face. "Why didn't you tell us?" the mage asked. "Us? I told Georg because I thought he could help me. I didn't tell you because it was booger all you could do except look at me all sofa-like, the way you do it now. Didn't really think I could stand that." Powell turned to Georg. "You can't help him." "I have helped him," Georg said, "up to a point. Even Rish can only do so much." "Perhaps magic may help where prayer is insufficient." He turned to Manet. "Sergeant, as of right now, the Brotherhood of Wizards is taking over this case." Manet found himself unsure what to say. The Brotherhood had the right to do that with cases involving magic, which this didn't, except insofar as John committed his crime while going after a wizard. But the Bard was dying, and the Brotherhood taking custody of him was the only way to maybe reverse that. Besides, he'd learned the hard way that the Brotherhood generally got their way. "I'll let Captain Rigby know." Manet moved to unlock the cell. "I hereby remand John the Bard to the Brotherhood's custody." "Thank you," Powell said. John, however, didn't move, even after the door opened. "What makes you think I want to go with you?" "Oh, come off it, John," Starkey said. "Don't make me have to carry you. Besides, we fought every foe in Flingaria together, including each other. Don't you want to have one last fight?" "Perhaps," Powell added, holding out a hand. "Unlike Mitos, it'll be a fight we can win." "Not bloody likely," John sighed. All right, let's do it." He grabbed Powell's hand. A large flash of light later, and all four of them were gone. Several guards were standing nearby, including Gonzal. "Geez, Sarge, you're just going to let him go? What about Captain Rigby?" "What about him?" "John didn't do any lasting harm. Besides, they're four of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. I don't think any of us wants to see one of them dying in the hole. They all deserve better than that, and to try to find a way to save the Bard." Gonzal made a noise. "Maybe. I think he's just some crazy Bard who should be locked up." "Luckily, what you think doesn't matter much," Manet said with a smile. "I'm the sergeant, so what I say goes. What I say now is that the fabulous foursome has one last fight. Let's hope they've got enough left to win it." Thank you very much. That was Used to Be in Across the Universe, Tales of Alternate Beatles, edited by Randy Dawn and Michael Ventrella. The story was written by Keith R.A. DeCandido, that's me, and takes place in the same universe as my novel Dragon Precinct and its sequels. Hope you enjoyed it. Here is a QR code, which will enable you to buy the book, and enjoy the book, and read the book, and love the book, and hug the book, and squeeze the book, and call the book George, or Paul, or John, or Ringo. Anyway, thank you very much.